Thank you. First off, I just want to say thank you very much for having me. I am relatively new to speaking, so engagements like this are very helpful to help me get used to speaking, and also just gives me more exposure, so I appreciate you guys giving me this opportunity. Thank you for coming out in the sketchy weather, and thank you for listening to me talk about what is kind of a heavy topic. So I hope you all find it informative and engaging. And I'm open for Q&A afterwards if anybody wants to. But other than that, I'll just go ahead and get started. So the name of this talk is I'm Just an Engineer. What are the ethical responsibilities of developers? And I just want to talk a little bit about me. I'm a Detroit native, so I came here from Detroit today. My previous career is communications. I was in the media part of communications, so everything from feature writing to editing, copy editing. I used to have an online music column for Jet magazine when it was still like in publication, things like that. And then I decided to kind of switch gears and move into tech in 2016. And I did I'm sure you all have heard of Grand Circus because I know that they have, they operate here in Grand Rapids as well. So I did a boot camp at Grand Circus in 2016 where I studied front-end web development. And as I've kind of progressed in my tech journey, I've also found an interest, because of this talk in a lot of ways, in data science. And I'm also moving into the UI, UX area as well. I'm very passionate about tech literacy and computer science education. So when I'm not speaking to wonderful people like you, I teach computer science. I teach coding to students in Detroit. Oh, I should turn off my notifications. But I'm just gonna mute everything. But I teach computer science for an organization called SMASH. It stands for Summer Math and Science Honors. It's a 5-week program that is aimed at students who are underrepresented in STEM, who are interested in pursuing STEM in college. And it's for 5 weeks. They live on a college campus, and then they have science and math and different core classes, and one of their core classes is computer science, and that's the class that I teach. So, and that's it. I won't talk too much more about me because I don't want to bore you all to death. So if you all are on Twitter or on social media, feel free to live tweet. My handle is at the bottom of each page, but I'll go ahead and give you all some other information. So if you want to live tweet this talk, if you are on Twitter, feel free to follow me. Feel free to tag me in your tweets. I made up a hashtag, softwaregr, and dev ethics. It just seemed like the thing to do. So if you are into live tweeting things that you're listening to, go for it. I won't be offended if I see you on your phone. So I want to talk about why we're here. So I want to examine how the efforts to move AI forward are built on statistical bias, and why those who build things using AI or who build AI itself should care. And I'll also discuss what a code of ethics could look like when approached by developers. So I just want to put this this quote into context. This quote is from Science magazine, from an article called "Artificial Intelligence Could Identify Gang Crimes and Ignite an Ethical Firestorm" from February 28th, 2018. And the man that is quoted in this is Blake Lemoine. He's a software developer at Google, and he has actually studied ways of reducing bias in artificial intelligence. And so this quote is actually what inspired me to do this talk in the first place, because Hao Chan, even though he's not wrong, what he said about, I'm just an engineer, he's not wrong, but I felt like that was a cop-out. So how do you build something that's for the purpose of something as invasive as predictive policing and not consider the implications of how it could be used or misused. And Blake Lemoine was quoted saying, "I don't necessarily think we shouldn't build tools for the police, or that we should," and he's commenting as an individual, not as a Google employee. He says, "I think when you're building powerful things, you have some responsibility to at least consider how this could be used." So I don't want to assume anybody's level of understanding, but everybody in here is a software developer or software developer adjacent. But I have this graphic that's kind of talking about the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning. I just think it's a cool graphic and a way of visualizing these terms that are pretty ubiquitous, but maybe people don't necessarily have the context for them. So artificial intelligence is a scientific field within computer science focusing on the study of computer systems that can perform tasks or solve problems that require human intelligence. And I think that's a good way of summarizing it. And then machine learning is a field within AI, so it's just kind of like Russian nesting dolls. It's a field within AI that focuses on a particular class of algorithms that can learn from data without being specifically programmed. So I want to discuss the main questions that we'll be exploring tonight. Do developers have an ethical responsibility when it comes to developing tech that could ultimately become a tool of state violence? Should developers have a say in how the tech they build is used once it's delivered to the client? Why should those who build software care how it's used? And how would you personally approach defining a code of ethics in software development? And so before I get into addressing each of these questions individually, I'd like to clarify that this is not an exploration of what those answers are, but how we can arrive at those answers. I want everyone to put on your thinking caps and keep an open mind during this presentation. This won't be all abstractions. Who is better to ask these questions than actual software developers? So I actually did a survey in, I want to say March of this year, and shared it with my network. So I created a survey basically with these questions and sent it out to my network and was like bugging everybody like, hey, do you know any software developers? Like, have them do this survey. And so I received 30 responses, and I'm sharing some of the responses that stood out to me in this later on in the presentation. So the first question, do developers have an ethical responsibility when it comes to developing tech that ultimately becomes a tool of state violence? So first, let's define state violence. And it's defined as acts of violence committed by an official state, military, or sponsored by a sovereign government outside of the context of a declared war, which targets civilians or show a disregard for civilian life in attacking targets, either people or facilities. So what does this look like in practice? And so we have two words, facial recognition, which may not sound like state violence off the top, but we'll get into that. And so I want to discuss Data for Black Lives. Data for Black Lives is a group of activists, organizers, and mathematicians who are committed to the mission of using data science to create concrete and measurable change in the lives of Black people. Data for Black Lives seeks to mobilize scientists around racial justice issues. So earlier this year, Data for Black Lives had a conference, and their opening panel was called Abolition in the Age of Big Data. This conference took place at MIT in January, and they convened data scientists, computer programmers, racial justice activists, and elected officials to discuss the role that data can have and play in Black communities, and facial recognition databases were discussed extensively during the opening panel. While most databases are populated from passport photos, or states that enroll all driver's license in federal databases, many law enforcement databases are populated with mugshots. So for areas with known issues around problematic policing, facial recognition databases largely contain mugshots of Black and brown faces. So this is a problem because if your facial recognition database is mugshots, the issue with facial recognition failing is it doesn't fail to identify, it will misidentify. So underneath it all, high arrest rates are rewarded, and the priority is to find someone and report the numbers to the city rather than the well-being of communities. And so this is a quote that I thought was interesting, or that I felt really spoke to the mission of Data for Black Lives. And technology in the hands of those in power will continue to be used to oppress. So I just wanted to talk about some things that are being done to keep tech accountable. And these are some different stories that I've come across. So from TechCrunch, Howard and MIT initiative grants $750,000 to projects that are looking to keep tech accountable. So, and it was the Ethics and Governance in AI initiative, which is a Harvard and MIT initiative. So earlier this year, the initiative awarded grants to various projects that are working to keep tech accountable. So one of them is Tattle, which is a project aiming to combat disinformation and false news spreading on WhatsApp. Sidekick, which is using machine learning tools to help journalists scour thousands of pages of documents for interesting data. The Rochester Institute of Technology will be using its grant money to look into detecting manipulated video, both designing its own techniques and evaluating existing ones. So, Tim Wong, I hope I said that right, is the director of the Ethics and Governance in AI initiative, and he said it's naive to believe that the big corporate leaders in AI will ensure that these technologies are being leveraged in the public interest. Philanthropic funding has an important role to play in filling in the gaps and supporting initiatives that envision the possibilities for AI outside of for-profit context. So the next question that I want to discuss is, should developers have a say in how the tech they build should be used once it's delivered to the client? And this was actually a really interesting story that came up while I was researching for this talk. And this quote is from an open letter on recent research auditing commercial facial analysis technology on behalf of concerned researchers, which urged Amazon to stop selling their recognition software to law enforcement after a study by Iniolua, Deborah Raji, and Joy Bolamwini published at the AAI-ACM conference on artificial intelligence, ethics, and society found that the version of Amazon's recognition tool, which was available in August 2018, had a much higher error rate when classifying the gender of darker-skinned women than lighter-skinned men. It was 31% versus 0%. Amazon recognition had more trouble identifying the gender of female and darker-skinned faces in photos with similar services from IBM and Microsoft. It mistook women for men 19% of the time, the study showed, and misidentified darker-skinned women for men 31% of the time. Before publishing their findings on Amazon recognition, the MIT researchers released a similar study examining services from IBM, Microsoft, and Megville, which is an artificial intelligence company in China. All three updated their services to address concerns raised by the researchers. And the company said last year, early customers included the Orlando Police Department in Florida and Washington County Sheriff's Office in Oregon. And so this brings us to Caleb Thompson. He's a software engineer and a speaker at a conference that I attended last year. His talk, Don't Get Distracted, explores the experience working for the Department of Defense and the software he was tasked with building to do one specific thing. It was a tool to use phones to find Wi-Fi signals. And so I just want to, this is an illustration of his talk that was done by someone who attended it. And then I want to read some of the quotes from his talk where he discussed his experience. And he said, all of the cool problems we were solving, finding nodes, speeding things up, making more accurate predictions, it was all so cool and so much fun. I hadn't thought about why we were putting all this work into finding a better place to sit and good Wi-Fi. That doesn't even make sense if you look at it for more than a few seconds. Does it find phones? This was never about finding better Wi-Fi. We were always finding phones carried by people. Remember I said I was working for the Department of Defense? The DoD is the military. I was building a tool for the military to find people based on where their phones were and shoot them. While this was an extreme example of code used in a way that the creator did not intend it, the project owner conveniently left out its purpose when explaining the goals. It's a living example of what software developers everywhere are faced with when they are hired to build something for a client. So it's a major problem when we're given so much power in tech, but we're not doing anything to ensure that we use it safely. Thinking about what we're doing and being careful to not build things that can be used maliciously is really important. Make your own decisions. Make your own choices. Make your own judgment. Don't get distracted by deadlines and feature requests. Think about the consequences of what you're building. Build in safeguards to prevent misuse, or don't build it because it's too dangerous. And by the way, this talk is on YouTube. You can Google Caleb Thompson, Don't Get Distracted, and you can see the whole talk on YouTube. So the third question is, why should those who build software care about how it's used? So I want to talk about, this is going to go off a little bit, but it's all related, I promise. So you may not know that there's software used across the country to predict future criminals, and it's called risk assessment. And it's shown to be biased against Black defendants. Risk assessments are increasingly common in courtrooms across the nation. They are used to inform decisions about who can be set free at every stage of the criminal justice system, from assigning bond amounts and even more fundamental decisions about defendants' freedom. Rating a defendant's risk of future crime is often done in conjunction with an evaluation of a defendant's rehabilitation needs. The Justice Department's National Institute of Corrections now encourages the use of such combined assessments at every stage of the criminal justice process. The publication ProPublica obtained risk scores assigned to more than 7,000 people arrested in Broward County, Florida in 2013 and 2014, and checked to see how many were charged with new crimes over the next 2 years. The same benchmark used by the creators of the algorithm. The score proved that remarkably unreliable in predicting, in forecasting violent crime. Only 20% of the people predicted to commit violent crimes actually went on to do so. With a full range of crimes taken into account, including misdemeanors such as driving with an expired license, the algorithm was somewhat more accurate than a coin flip. Of those deemed likely to reoffend, 61% were arrested for any subsequent crimes within 2 years. ProPublica also turned up significant racial disparities in forecasting who would reoffend. The algorithm made mistakes with Black and white defendants at roughly the same rate, but in very different ways. The formula was particularly likely to falsely flag Black defendants, future criminals, wrongly labeling them in this way at almost twice the rate of white defendants. Black defendants were mislabeled as low risk, often more than Black defendants. If computers could accurately predict when defendants were likely to commit new crimes, the criminal justice would be fairer and more selective about who is incarcerated and for how long. The trick, of course, is to make sure the computer gets it right. If it's wrong in one direction, a dangerous criminal could go free. If it's wrong in another direction, it could result in someone unfairly receiving a harsher sentence or waiting longer for parole than is appropriate. And another example of why those who build software should care how it's used can be explored by looking at a tool that I think we all take for granted, which is search engines. Pantene, like the shampoo Pantene, is launching a campaign to break this cycle of biased research results. Enter SHE, which is an acronym for Search Human Equalizer, a Google Chrome extension that works on the search backend to deliver more equalized and accurate results for 150 common queries from greatest thinkers to top CEOs. In the latter category, only 10% of search results represent women, despite the fact that 28% of CEOs are women. And they're not stopping at 150. The program is encouraging users to flag additional terms with biased search results to eventually add to SHE's term bank as the program grows. The goal being to give accurate representation to women and people of color in search across the board. This looks like it doesn't want to play, so I'm going to show a clip that's talking about SHE.
Women have been transforming the world every day in ways both big and small. But you wouldn't know it from search results, because society has taught search engines to become biased.
If you're searching greatest painters, the default is going to be male.
As a mother who has 2 daughters, it was heartbreaking to see the sexualization of girls.
What am I supposed to feel like if I type in something perfect and I don't really see myself?
Search results reflect cultural stereotypes, distorting women's achievements and potential.
In Spanish, asiática is a woman from Asia. I don't understand. Asian does not equal sex.
That is not right, because it isn't true.
I just think it's important that women's contributions be seen at the same level as their male counterparts.
That's why Pantene created SHE, Search Human Equalizer, transforming the way we search by removing the bias. Search engines understand a query, determine relevance, and present results. As a browser extension, SHE operates on the search backend, filtering and repositioning results to yield more accurate representations. So now, a schoolgirl means a schoolgirl, and ethnicity is not a sexual invitation.
This time when I search greatest engineers, there's actually 3 females in the top 10.
It's definitely a more equitable search result.
This is what we should see. It's me. It's everyone.
By using SHE, you can influence the way search engines work today, giving women's transformations the visibility they deserve.
It's the most exciting time in the world, and we can transform ourselves in ways we've never have.
SHE is available for everyone to take the bias out of search and is an open invitation for search engines to do the same.
Action.
Together, we can change our search behavior on a global scale, while SHE continues to help transform the world. Take the bias out of your search at shetransforms.us. Pantene, power to transform.
And so the final question is, how would you personally approach defining a code of ethics in software development? And this is what I mentioned earlier about referring to some of the survey responses that I got that I found were interesting. So survey, like I said, I got about 30 responses, but I think I'm including roughly half of them. So our friend Jed here says this is just like a terms and conditions document stating how far a developer is willing to go in design, implementation, and administering of software that can engage in cyber warfare activities and espionage. This should give an employer clear light on what a developer is willing to design, implement, and administer. And this one was kind of long, so I had to break it up into bullets. Always consider potential misuse, just as you would traditional security vulnerabilities. If possible, mitigate misuse during development, for example, taking privacy concerns into account and only including information that is needed rather than what is available. Use for state violence is a manifestly greater concern than SQL injection or buffer overflow. We have disclosure practices and guidelines about code vulnerabilities. Surely we should have disclosure and guidelines about societal vulnerabilities. And this person asked to be anonymous. And Mark Henderson said, I like the JSON license approach. Don't allow people to use my tech to harm others. Just start from there and work out any thorns along the way. If I'm delivering software, the user must use it within the scope of what the license states. In the license, I will provide ethical use of the software and hopefully provide provisions of penalties. I will also try to embed safeguards that will allow the software to be used in a way where it will not violate the ethical license clauses. And this person, who goes by Sleepy Machine, said, I've helped organize in the tech industry like Tech Workers Coalition, techworkerscoalition.org. Education and mentoring for organizing fellow tech workers seems to be more effective than a code of ethics. And I thought that that was interesting because you don't really hear that much about organizing in tech. So I like the idea of organizing around, of just organizing in tech and then kind of building out from there. I would make it very similar to the Hippocratic Oath, particularly around non-maleficence. I am not a huge believer of code of ethics in software development. I find that the mob mentality kicks in and it veers too far in one direction and becomes more harmful than good. I believe in a simple set of guidelines used to push an agenda of common sense, courtesy, and productivity. And this one was interesting because I'm not sure what mob mentality can exist around a code of ethics, but I didn't get much more context outside of that. I just thought that was interesting that he chose to use mob mentality to describe code of ethics. We need to fight against the information cartel and embrace open data and open source AI. There is no way in stopping somebody in misusing AI, so the job of developers is to denounce the black sheep, and don't join the dark side of the force. And I knew I was gonna get at least one Star Wars reference, so they did not let me down. I honestly think the code of ethics we should have is very simple: do no harm. This would require a lot of sacrifices, and perhaps people would feel like we would be going backwards in our quality of life. A lot of the technology we use may harm others or the earth in some capacity, but by and large, I think we as a humanity would be better for it. This one's kind of long, but I will just kind of paraphrase. The basic idea is that the developer engages with users and stakeholders in an ongoing basis. Bad technology often attempts to change or engineer human behavior before it evolves in an organic way. The question every developer should ask themselves is this: could this line of code I am putting down right now be used in any shape or form to create Skynet in the future? If the answer is yes, then don't write that code, period. I did not see a Terminator reference coming, so that made me happy. So, more questions in conclusion. Why should we have a code of ethics in software development, and how should we approach ethics in software development? And so I consulted a mentor of mine, Deveney Hamilton. She has spoken about human bias in AI and how to eliminate it. She works for Sassafras Tech Collective in Ann Arbor, and so she was one of the first people that I talked to when I decided to develop this talk. And she said, we spend the majority of our time working. Why would we want to put our life energy into something that consumes so much of our time without being thoughtful or intentional? Most professionals have ethics and standards guidelines. Software development is relatively new, and that is taken for granted. No one practicing software development should take the lack of a code of ethics for granted. It's not needed any less. Software impacts our lives to the same degree as seeing a doctor or seeking counsel from a lawyer. How should we approach ethics in software development? Transparency. True ethics often requires open source. Democratically controlled. Built by teams that are representative of the world we live in. And that's all I have. Thank you.